Okay, so I'm going to go through a little bit of how we can deploy a baseline DevSecOps. This one's based on Jenkins, so a lot of the configuration is really just trying to automate a deployment from scratch for getting a Jenkins plugin wired up and configured to run scans and any type of static validations you want to on your code. So the main problem that normally occurs is to do that you have to understand how the plugins work. So Jenkins has a rich plugin architecture and they really have good reporting in here, but you need to understand what those tools are, how to wire them into your pipelines. Once you install the plugin, you have to jump over and understand the configurations that you need, get everything wired together, and it tends to be a bit of a chore. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Here I pointed it at a GitLab project. It's pulling all of the branches from that GitLab project and running the pipeline against it. Right now it's a really simple pipeline, but I'll kind of show more of what's going on there and how we'll extend that in the future. But basically, we're doing some static analysis to do pilot and to do one container scan here. The other one was a placeholder as I was playing with Claire instead of Anchor, but kind of the same idea. So the Anchor plugin ends up giving you a nice report to look at different policies on the container. Here I was just running an old container, so I'd get some warnings on here. Ideally, it all passes with your base images and your built containers, and then also any CVEs. The reason this isn't showing any, and I should just rerun the pipeline, is because it's still populating because this is a fresh deployment, so it actually takes a little bit of time to get all of the definitions ingested into Anchor. It's kind of unfortunate it doesn't have a little bit of lag time before it works, but anyway, you see some of the warnings still pop up here, and you'll get more if I rerun it in about an hour, and that'll be more accurate. And then I'm feeding Pylint into a warnings display here so that we can keep track of kind of what Pylint is reporting on. And then you can set up your policies on whether or not some of these static analysis tools are just generating tickets in Jira or actually failing builds, but that's a different level of maturity. Okay, so that's kind of the problem and the end goal of what we're doing, and then obviously on every build, you'll go through this entire pipeline, running everything on the new source code, and getting some feedback. Let's look at kind of how this deployment works. So this is the definition of when it checks out from GitLab, is you can see the definitions of exactly what jobs are being run. Here's our top level stage, and then the tool that gets run inside of that. So here's our Pylint and our reporting. You can see some scattered things like wiring in credentials that are ingested into Jenkins, and some of it's just static right now. Obviously, you can use Kubernetes a little bit heavier to auto-generate passwords and then wire them in through credentials and secrets. That's kind of a next step for being production ready. Right now, some stuff is just static for simplicity. So, runs Pylint. This is the stage that would run Claire. I think you'll run multiple scanning tools at the Docker scanning stage. They have varying results depending on where their sources of truth are. And then this is the one that's really you're seeing the reports on. So this is running the Anchor and running it against whatever images. So you can basically just feed in all images that come from your Kubernetes deployment, aggregate all of those into a file, and then run the scanning tools over the top of all of them, and then do some reporting. So right now this deployment is just supporting that pipeline. So if we take a peek at what our cluster looks like, you have a couple, all this stuff's in a pipeline namespace, but you have the system that is running Anchor and the one that's running Jenkins. Next is in here for container repository as well. So then we kind of jump over to how we're resolving the problem of configuration and which plugins get installed. So actually the Jenkins Helm chart helps a lot here. So there's a plugin section that you can define which plugins get installed along with their versions. And then you kind of have this little section for, I think this is Jenkins configuration as code section. This is a remnant of the demo, but then you have these config scripts, and you can see whatever exists on that configuration page is kind of how you reference and pass in a whole bunch of parameters. So that's what we're seeing on that other page, is basically wiring in parameters on this page. A little trick here, just real quick, is there is a nice way to actually generate some of that, because the headings and everything is a little loose in the way that they define their tags to be able to supply some of those configurations. But basically what happens is, if you go to this configuration as code and you typed in things manually one time, is you can kind of get the feel for what fields you can toggle, and that would just give you this nice file that you can then go and cherry pick little things off, inject them with variables where you need to, but you don't have to go hunting for exactly where things actually live under this complex YAML.